Hello everybody, my name is Tiffany, I'm the Tipsy Artist, and today we are going live to teach you how to paint this adorable little scarecrow. Alright, so I have a little model here that you can view the whole time that I've already done, and then this one is about, I've got a little bit of a start, so I'm going to talk to you about the first step that makes this super easy for beginners. Alright, so here we go. We have what's called traceables that I use a lot now. And this way it allows you to have all the details with the line art. So we have this on a printable, and then your kit comes with some graphite paper. I have a little strip of it up here, and I always place it dull side up, shiny side with the graphite facing towards the canvas. And like this one, I had the entire line out, the line art design actually was on this printable, and then you could just trace it all, and your kit comes with tape and a colored pencil and the printable and the graphite paper. Everything that you need is there in the kit for you. So I did all of this in advance. I also include Sharpies with my kits now, so yay! I realize a lot of people don't have Sharpies at home, so now all the kits come with the Sharpies too. So again, everything that you need. So you have the option of doing this additional black hard line around this too, which I personally feel it makes it a lot easier for beginners. I know I love it, and then the feedback that I keep getting is that beginners really like it too. So that really helps as well. And then I've left this up here so that you can get an understanding of basically how it works. So this is an example of, we have some traceables that are just like monogram letters or just popular words, so you can have your options. So like with this one, and you can make as many copies of this so it's very reusable. So I took one copy and I decided that I wanted to go ahead and use the word thankful. And we have several words that are really popular. I have another sheet that has like love and blessed and joy, faith, peace, things like that, for example. In a really pretty font. So, but we could have done grateful or welcome as an example. And I just, I cut it out and then I taped it to the graphite paper. This way you can definitely see it and place it on the design. Oh, good. Home from the hospital. Yay. Pray for continued healing for you. Awesome. And thank you so much. All right. So we've got this word right here, and then I just use Scotch tape. Your kit comes with some tape too, and then this just helps me secure it. One little helpful hint too, when you secure it, I do like for it to go ahead and touch the wood on the back with the tape. That will really help it stick securely. The canvas does not receive tape very well. It just kind of lifts right off. So if you will go ahead and extend a pretty big enough piece to go ahead and wrap it onto the wood in the back, then that will help keep it secure for you. So that really helps a lot. So I've given you an example of how this looks so far. Then I had a red colored pencil, which again just comes with it. And then the reason why I always do an alternative color is so that way you can see where you've been. So in this case it was red, and the color's arbitrary, it doesn't really matter. The important part is that it is contrasting so that you see where you've been here. So I go ahead and trace it all out. That way I know where my trace has been. And then when I'm done, then I can just do a lift. And then I've got, initially I'll just have the pencil, because again, this is just graphite, so it'll just do a pencil rendering here, which is nice and light. A lot of forgiveness there. It does erase off. If you have a little mishap, you can erase it off and realign if you need to. I'm gonna go and lift this off. I did go ahead and firm mine up with a Sharpie. And the reason why I love to do that is because the Sharpie does bleed through. The other option that you could do with this too is if you wanted to, you could just wait. That way you could really minimize your time. And like on this one, for example, you could just paint all the way through. You could come back in with this traceable here and then place it here on top. And the graphite will actually show up on top of this, and then you could just trace on top and then do it with a Sharpie right on top. So that's another really fun way to do it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share that with you, make sure you know that that can definitely work that way. All right, so but in the essence of time and me having to teach straight through and not really take any breaks, I just go ahead and place mine on here. That way I can actually just do a light overpaint. It will bleed right through, and then I'll touch this up at the very end, and then I'll just basically teach you how to paint at the very end. Since freehanding is still an option. It's usually not what people choose, but it's still definitely an option. All right, so we've got a great foundation here now. We've got all this line art done. So now I can go ahead and start to paint. Now let me talk about all the tools that I've got nearby that really help me out. So I've got all kinds of, now mine's kind of a big old mess, but we have a big paint kit that comes to you. I've used so many that I just keep mine in a big hunk of junk. Is that a word? Just, I don't know what I'm describing there. Lots of paint in a big basket there. All right, and then, let's see, I've got water nearby. Here's our lovely clean water. And then I've got some plates nearby and our little brush kit. All right, so what we've got a mama brush, and then little buddy, and then little bit. And then we've got either like a wash rag, paper towel, or, you know, anything works like that. That just helps you get through this process. All right, so we've got all of our setup here ready to go. So now I can go ahead and just start to paint. All right, now I'm gonna start in the background first with a really pretty light blue. So in the beginning here, I'm going to grab my primary cyan. It's quite beautiful. Some of you may have a cobalt blue at home. It's very similar to this. And then I did a preload on some white in advance. But we do have titanium white. Let me just go ahead and give you a visual on that. We do have titanium white in your kit. All right, so to begin with here, I'm gonna do a pretty big amount. This is a big area, so I'm gonna do like a big heaping dollop, about a quarter size amount of this primary cyan blue. Okay, and then I'm going to use the biggest brush to start with. So we've got our mama brush here, 1/2 inch flat. And I'm going to start by just doing a nice mix with both of these together. So I'll have a mix of light blue here, and then I'll actually do some of the mixing on the canvas. So I'll talk about that here in a minute as well. But I'm gonna grab a nice big dollop of the white, and then let's kind of push into a little bit of that blue, and let's just mix that together. So this gives me a really pretty light blue to begin with. Now I typically like to add a little bit of turquoise in my sky as well, so there are some options that you can use to do this. All right, so we have a really pretty color called Viridian that I love to add because it's definitely very teal. All right, so I've got a little bit of that, got a nickel-sized dollop there. And let's see, you can also just go with some cadmium green in here too. And then that mix in there will also definitely bring in a nice little hint of turquoise. So I did a little pea-sized amount of that. I'll give you a visual here. And kind of play with these mixes. So this is what my palette looks like so far. So if I add a little bit of just even the cadmium green and I push that into that light blue and the white, then that goes right to a turquoise. And now I'm going to show you a little bit of this Viridian with the white. So that's really pretty too. So we've got some nice mix happening here. And then I like to actually play a little bit in my sky and bring all those in. Now, notice something really quick here. I do not have time to clean this brush right now, so I'm going to make sure and leave it in my water. Acrylic paint does set up and dry very quickly. So if you do not have a chance to clean your brush right away, try to reconnect. We'll see. We still have ocean waves, but my computer just, I think it left me. So turn that back on. Okay, so here we go. We've got our turquoise over here. We've got our Viridian. Ooh, power. Power's coming back on, powering on. All right. So I'm going to keep pushing into this white and then a little bit of that turquoise and then even a little bit of that light blue happening there on the side. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and push this on in what looks like the letter X over and over again. And then I need to adjust a little bit here, kind of off there. Okay, so let's pull this in and I'm going to make what looks like the letter X over and over and over again. And then push it. Y'all still with me? Here in Guthrie, it's a beautiful day outside, but for some reason we just lost power everywhere, so who knows? We do have a big movie production going on, so maybe they sucked up all of our power into the streets. All right, so that happens sometimes. All right, so here we go. Lots of white, lots of turquoise. I'm going to continue to push this on back and forth. Little letter X's. All right, I'm so sorry, you guys. I don't know what's happening. They just keep disconnecting us. So, hang with me, I guess. We'll see what happens. All right, so again, little letter X's over and over again, little cross stroke, just back and forth here. And then as I work this in, I'm going to also continue in with just pure white paint. And I'll keep that going with the mix too. So just little letter X's back and forth. And I'm not worried about this word in here because again, I promise it will just bleed right through. Make sure I've got this there, that way you can see it. So this creates a lot of really beautiful texture in our background. And then also working sometimes with a bigger brush is also really nice when we're doing all this background paint. I'm gonna leave this in water really quick. You can also use a larger brush. I call this my Big Daddy brush, but it's a 3/4 inch. And this is really helpful and very pretty sometimes too. As an option, not necessary, but it's a nice option when doing large backgrounds. And we definitely have a lot of wiggle room here. So you can see that I've got a nice little bit of everything kind of peeking through. Add a little bit of that blue as I go, that cyan blue. And kind of work that in back and forth. And then to create a little bit more texture, I'll work in a little bit of white. And again, the trick is just lots of repetition. And then just keep alternating those colors. So again, you've got lots of fun things to kind of dip into randomly, because in the beginning we showed you the cyan blue, the viridian, the cadmium green, which, you know, kind of makes it evolve into a turquoise, and then of course our white off here to the side. So we can just keep just kind of randomly alternating the same stroke, just back and forth. And I'm going to concentrate on the larger areas to begin with. I will have to eventually go to a smaller brush to do cut-in work, but for now, I want to really optimize the therapy aspect of this. So this is a really relaxing part of the process. And that's definitely my biggest goal with all my paintings. They're definitely designed to still be beautiful and cute, but at the same time, definitely optimize the pleasure aspect of it, which means they're just supposed to be very relaxing to do. So we try to minimize as much of that labor-intensive cut-in work as possible and just keep it really simple. And you'll see this word will actually start to peek through. I know it looks like a little scary. You'll think, oh no. Especially if you're working on it at home, you might go, oh no, I think I just covered up all my work. But I promise, as it dries, it will start to bleed through there. So all your tracing work is saved. And I don't have to be just too precise, because again, those little lines will also bleed through. So it's kind of just a rough cut in there. And let's keep remembering to alternate in some of those different colors. Fun, I'll push into like a little bit of the viridian, kind of push that back and forth, and that little letter X. So you can kind of play with some of those different colors too for just some of that really fun variety in the sky. And then also pay attention to how I'm holding the brush. So one of the ways that I get a nice brush stroke over the top here that feathers it out is by holding my brush more over to the side parallel to the canvas. And I'll just keep working that, little crisscrosses. Now the only color that I don't go into really directly is probably the cadmium green. I use that in the beginning just to create more of a turquoise color on my palette. I don't normally go into just cadmium green here in the background, but I will go into occasionally that little touch of iridium because it is more like a teal color. And again, lots of repetition is definitely really important because it just lightly feathers that out. And of course, how I hold the brush is also really important too. All right, I have a little issue. So you can probably see that little hair coming off. That's kind of driving me crazy. I have some scissors up here. And I'll get to that later. You can just snip that off. I'm gonna go ahead and place mine back into the water, and I'm just gonna grab another one here. But if that happens, I would recommend just a pair of scissors and just cutting it off, and then it'll be fine. Especially when it's that unruly and just one. That's pretty easy to snag. I don't want to get too thick in there, so it's kind of lightly. All right, so again, here's my palette, and let's add a little bit of this Viridian to that light blue, kind of warm it up to more of a really pretty like seafoam or turquoise. And then we'll work in some of this in here. Just gonna hold it up so you can see it a little bit better. Make sure I'm still in frame. And you can see how loosely I'm cutting in around these smaller shapes in here. Not too concerned about a real tight cut in because you can see how it just bleeds right through. And I know that my next shade of colors will easily just come over the top of that. This is a pretty light color. Now, if I were coming in with black, obviously that would not work at all. But because this is a really light color, we can go ahead and do that, and you can see how it bleeds right through, and so it's still working for us. All right, and I've got a little bit in here. And just kind of lightly roughing it in. Now, probably shouldn't have roughed in over the face. I can easily correct that. If I were you, I'd avoid it. But now that I think about it, that might cause some beginners some issues. They might get kind of, oh, that didn't go well, kind of a feeling. Everything else is really easy to color over, but that is going to be a light cream, so. Oh well, I'll fix it, I promise. As I say, there are no mistakes, only possibilities. All right, so now I want to come in with a little bit more white, kind of be a bit more dramatic with the texture in the sky here. And lots of those little cross strokes happening. So it's really, really a nice, pretty texture. So again, some important tips here on this. Lots of little, what feels like little cross strokes, like making the letter X. And also holding that brush over to the side. That gives you that light, gentle hand and that nice feathering approach there. All right, so we've got all of that background happening now around our surface area. So now we can go ahead and work into the design with a little bit more detail and color. And then all this black line, as the paint dries, it will start to bleed through, so we don't have to worry about that. We'll be able to come back and touch all that up later. All right, so my next shade here that I'm going to go ahead and work on, I'm going to go ahead and do a really light, I'm going to let the face just completely, it's almost dry to begin with, but I'm going to let that set up and dry even more before I come back in with coloring here. But I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to save all the black to the very end because I don't want that to muddy up any of the lighter colors. So I'm going to go ahead and start with like maybe the light gray here. So we do have some Mars Black. And then I'm going to take this and push just a teeny amount. We don't need that much. So a little tiny amount there. Because a little bit of black goes a whole long way. All right, so my brush is just moist. And then some interesting things about adding some water to your paint. Hi, Lo. Yes, happy Friday. I actually see that. Yeah, I don't know what Facebook has done, but I'm starting to lose. I don't see my comments that much anymore, and then I have to catch them all later. But I actually see that one today. So yay, hello. All right, so I'm going to pick up a nice big dollop of white. Then just barely touch into the black. You can see how it's just a teeny tiny touch there. Mix that in. This will give me a really pretty light gray. And that's what I'm going for here at this step. It's just a really pretty light gray. So this will be my little overalls here. Just keeping it simple. And now this is when I do have to start being a little bit more attentive to cut in. So in the beginning, we try to optimize our loose, free, non-cut-in work as much as we can. I try to give you as much freedom as I can. But then at some point, we do have to go ahead and just start to do that cut-in work. So it means we have to start using smaller brushes and getting into those tinier little areas there. So I'm going to go ahead and work into this light gray. Again, still trying to use as big of a brush as I can in the larger areas. This is my Mama brush. And I'll go ahead and, I'm just about out of, I'm going to have to switch to a smaller brush because I'm just getting to teeny areas here. I can use the line edge of my brush for tiny little areas in the petal. But that's about as much as I can do. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Mama, put it in the water, and then I'll switch over to my little bit brush. And then want to make sure we've got enough mix here. So Let's mix up some more of that light gray. Now, what I need to do now is I need to go ahead and do a twist. I'll twist it in between my fingertips, and then that will rotate the head of the brush into a nice fine point. I've got lots of little stray hairs today. It happens. All right, I think I'm gonna be okay. Just up, there's one little one. All right, so I just basically hold the brush just like a pencil, and then I'll go ahead and work in and around all those tiny little petals. It's really small in here, so we really have to make sure that we just really keep twisting as we load it up with paint. So tiny little areas in here. Now, when you're working at home, you can actually add a little bit of water into the mix to make it a bit more fluid. But the one big caution that I'll tell you is that anytime you add a little bit of water to help it be more fluid, which definitely is very helpful, just make sure that your canvas is completely flat on the surface when you do that. And then that way you can work in with that water, that's just a teeny amount of water added into the paint, and it will help it be more fluid into an area to fill the space easily. It's a great tool to be able to do that. However, it's not that easy for beginners to do when you're on an easel because it creates water runs. So if you are going to do that at home, again, I encourage you to do so when necessary. Especially it helps a lot when doing fine little details in tiny areas. It thins the paint out and it just makes it easier to fill in those tinier areas. So it is very helpful, but again, just make sure you put your canvas on a flat surface just to avoid those water runs. It really does help. All right, so we have one more little area here of the overall happening. All right, so now I can go ahead and do a little bit of that fun sunflower color. That's also a really light, bright color. Still we'll be using our little bit brush. And this time I need some primary yellow. So I'm going to start a new plate here, because this one is pretty full and with a very different set of colors. They don't necessarily blend very well with the yellow. All right, and then let's do a little bit of the cadmium yellow here too. All right, so I've got my little bit brush again. You know what? I'm going to do a little bit of white here too. So I'll make sure I've got some white off here to the side. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of the primary yellow, cadmium yellow. See how vibrant that's becoming, very bright and beautiful. And then you can even add a tiny amount of white to that. So I'm basically just kind of stroking into each dollop and then combining all of those to make a nice color with all three of those shades. Now, the belly of my brush is getting quite full and it's going to be challenging to do a nice little tiny area. So I'm going to go ahead and take it and just kind of twist it out a little bit. That still keeps it loaded, but it will twist it into a nice fine point. And so this is what we can use to go ahead and fill our little petals here with color. So I'll take it out from that little point, going all the way back in. If I happen to overlap over the black in the center, it's okay, because that's going to be really easy to touch up over the top later. So I'm going to let that set up a little bit. We'll come back in later and do some accent colors over the top, but for right now we want to go ahead and let that set up and dry. All right, next up will be some beautiful orange at the bottom. All right, so I have a really pretty cadmium orange. So let's go ahead and do a nice little dollop of that. And then I've also got these shades that also blend beautifully with the orange that mix well to make the pumpkin shade. So what I will do, still using a little bit brush, where's that one going? All right, so here's a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of that orange and then a little bit of the cadmium yellow, which is, it's really close to that, a lot lighter, but that will really help give this some weight on the canvas and help it cover a lot better for a more opaque finish. So that is quite lovely. Again, using little bit brush, let's do a little twist in here so we get a nice fine point. This will give us better control to work into a shape. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and work into these little pumpkins. So at first I have to hold the brush, you know, just more like a pencil to get into these little shapes here. But when I'm done with that first coat, then I can go ahead and take my brush and just hold it more over to the side, flat side of the brush facing, and then do light little strokes over the top to help really get some good coverage in over that surface area. But at first I'm going to go around those little loops of the pumpkin. We can also add a little bit of this primary yellow into the pumpkin as well. You can see how it still looks very orange, but it's a lot lighter and brighter, and that's another option too. So getting into all these little pumpkin shapes here. So the line work, as I hold the brush, I just take a stroke down. It's almost like making a little parentheses, but then I'm going to go ahead and go around a little curve and then sweep it back up. But definitely little curves. So it's kind of a little twist with the brush like this as I'm making it go around those little shapes of the pumpkin. I got one more little beauty over here. Working in that lighter yellow, just a hint of that primary yellow in with the orange. And then you get really good coverage area. Remember to kind of hold the brush more over to the side. And then later we can come back in with an accent over the top. But for right now, we're just really working on what I call color blocking. And so it gets a really nice shade of color over the surface. All right, so that's our orange to begin with. Let's see, this is nice and dry right now, so I'm going to come back in with, let's do a nice big dollop of white, and then let's do a little bit of this primary yellow. So we're going to mix those two together. We want a nice pale yellow, really light, super light. So you can pull in a little bit more white there. So super light, pale yellow. It always takes a little bit more white than you think. It's just almost just like a tiny little dab of yellow. But again, keep it very pale. And then I'm going to go ahead and work into this little face right here. And just get that nice color blocking move in there. So this will just cover that up. And then that little face will bleed through here in a little while. So this is a great foundational stage. We'll work that in. And then I need to go ahead and work on his cute little shirt here. All right, so up there, I did it with just like a white color, which you can do, or you could do another, you could just play with a different color here too. There's just all kinds of things you could do, really. And now I'm just thinking about it. All right, let's do a little bit more white. A little bit more of this pale, pale yellow, like a light cream color. And you have to be super, super careful with how much black you put in, but I'm just going to barely touch into a little bit of black. You can see how super tiny I am. A little bit goes such a long way. But if you mix that together, see that it almost, especially with the golden tones of the yellow, it can bring you to a khaki color. So that could be another little, bring you closer to that. So again, it's giving us khaki. The thing that I see most beginners do is they usually always put in too much black, and it just darkens it to a super dark gray, and they have a hard time recovering from it. So again, just make sure that you just barely touch into the black. Start there. It'll surprise you how overpowering just even that tiny amount of black is. All right, so we've got this really pretty khaki color now. So I'm going to go ahead and work this into the sleeve. So for the big sections here, again, this bigger little buddy brush, that's what this one's called. I can work in with little buddy, but I will have to do some of the fine tuning with my little bit. Because we've got tiny little corners in here, and then right in there. And in order to get a nice, smooth brush, more over to the side. And then in here, it's probably easier just to go ahead and switch over to a little bit. Do a little twist into that khaki color. And then just work into that little corner there. We got one more little area of the shirt that's peeking through. And then, let's see. Yep, I think that's good. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and do the bright color for the little bandana that's happening. So that color will be some cadmium red. Just a little pea-size amount. This is a really small area. And then I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit of some primary magenta. This will help cool that red off just a little bit, because I'm wanting more of a cool red. So a little pea-size amount of that as well, and that's primary magenta. All right, so I'll just push into a little bit of the cadmium, push into the primary magenta. Let's mix those together. And it's definitely going to more of a cool red. You can See the transition that's happening there. Now I'm going to twist into that color. Nice fine point now to work with. And then we want to go ahead and just lightly fill in this little area with the bandana. And then this comes down to a point. We've got a little circle there in the middle, so I'm going to tell you a little trick to get into that circle to make it easier on you. All right, so there's the circle there, so I'm going to come back in with a brush handle, pretty tiny little circle, and I'm going to go ahead and just take the end and just dip right into that color that we just mixed up. There it is, and I'll just push straight forward. A little twist, and there's a perfect little circle right there. So that makes that very easy on you. All right, now we need to mix up a little bit of brown. So if you do not have brown, this is how you mix it up. So we're going to start with some cadmium red. There it is. Then we'll use some primary yellow. And then we need some Mars black. All right, so the brown on this. So basically, all three of these. I'm a little bit more minimal when I go into the black, so I'm a little bit more heavy-handed to go into the red and the yellow first. And then I add the black as needed. It kind of depends on how light or dark you want to make the brown. But, you know, as you can just imagine, black can take it. Look at how dark that got. It's still brown, but it's a very dark chocolate, like dark chocolate brown. So if you want the brown to be a lighter shade, then of course you can add more yellow to it, and that'll warm it up to a lighter brown. So let's bring that a little bit closer, but that's our brown. And again, we used cadmium red, primary yellow, and then our Mars black. All right, so I have those little stems on the pumpkin to go ahead and do with brown. So I'll do a little twist here into that color. And we've got tiny little stems here. This will also be a nice way to accent the line work that we have basically happening with our pumpkins too. Okay. Now we've got our brown, and we also have a little bit of that residual khaki still left over. So I'm going to play with a little bit of both of those. See, that really lightens it up a lot. And then let's grab a little bit more of this yellow, because we still have a little bit of this hay. So you can see what I've done here. I've taken a little bit of that brown, worked back into that khaki, which was the primary yellow, the white, super tiny touch of black. And you can add a little bit more yellow to, of course, warm it up a little bit. But this will give you that really pretty color for the hay that happens in the background here. So this is looking lovely. We do a little twist here into that paint. And we've got that little bit of hay that comes out of his little shirt here. And then to add a little bit of shadow into this, we can always work back in with little bits of the darker brown too. So as this is nice and wet, then I can also just barely dip into a little bit of that brown and then work wet to wet into that hay. And so that adds a nice little bit of shadow in there. So start with the cuff and then just pull out and then lift off with a light hand. So again, this color mix back here was primary yellow, white, tiny amount of black. That makes that really pretty light khaki to begin with. I warmed it up even more with more yellow to bring in the look of the hay. And then now we're bringing in some of that brown too, that we're just kind of mixing back and forth here. All right, so this is a great foundation for that hay. It's lacking dimension and shadow though, so we're going to go ahead and work into that brown. Tiny amount. While the paint's still wet, wet to wet, we're going to get a nice soft blend on that. And this looks a little rough up next to the edge, but that's a part that we'll come back in later with a hard black line, and we'll refine that out a little bit. So don't worry too much about that rough transition right there. All right, and we have more of this to go here at the base. So we have little tiny amounts of this hay down here. So it's just peeking out from behind the pumpkin. And again, this is looking a little rough in that transition, but when we come back in with that fun accentuating line to define the pumpkin, see, that'll clean that back up. So the paint's still wet. I need some shadows happening, so I'll touch into a little bit of the brown and then work that up through that hay. All right, so we've got a lot of this stuff happening right here. Little sections there. I'll grab a little bit more yellow, mix in with that khaki. Pull that up. All right, nice and wet to begin with, so again, I'll come back in with that brown right over the top. Just tiny little lines that pull through. You get a nice soft blend with that wet paint behind it. So it's a nice transition. Let's bring a little bit closer. All right, now we've got more that's coming from the bottom. I am running out of paint though, so I'm going to reload. I think that's kind of nice just to give a little reminder of what we've done to create this anyway. So we've got our primary yellow. And then let's grab a dollop of the white. Grab more of that. That's what we've got going on up here. And then let's touch into a tiny, tiny amount of black. That's all we really need. And then I need to blend those together. Need more white. You always need more white than you think with this. Now I'll keep some of this brighter as a highlight, but for the most part, I have to have a lot more that is just quite a bit more neutral and in that khaki realm. So I'm having to come back in with a lot more white here. All right, I just created an oopsie on my canvas. You can see, this is what I have on the other side. And then I just did that. All right, so teachable moment. Because we all do this. We all like have, I call them possibilities. Like right now, it's not a mistake. It's a possibility to teach. All right, so here's what we've got. We've got, let's take a clean brush and clean water. Turn it flat. Get it while it's still fresh. Got my mama brush here. I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bit of that water right into the top. Now let's dab it with a paper towel. And then that will lift right off. Now, another teachable moment. Because here's what happened. Okay, so it did lift off a little bit of the paint. Now you can see it actually lifted off. It did such a great job of removing the paint that it removed all the paint and lifted off completely. So I do have to do a little bit of a touch-up there. So I'm going to come back in with my Mama brush, just slightly moist. I still have my color palette nearby with that nearby look that we had. So I've got a little bit of that white, a little bit of that light blue. And the good news is it was a cross stroke pattern, so it can feather out nicely into that background without having to be just super exact. So I'm going to do a slight little cross hatch stroke, just kind of lightly feather that out. And I tend to go more light than dark when feathering that in, so I'll push in a little bit more of that white into that feathering out of the crosshatch stroke there. So just lightly feather that out. And ta-da, we fixed it. All right, we do lots of repairs at paint parties. So that is how we do it. Another way sometimes too is to take Q-tips. They're beautiful to have laying around, and you can use them. You can put them in water, do a small lift in a small contained area, and take another dry Q-tip and then lightly touch down and lift off. So especially in tiny areas, Q-tips are really helpful. All right, so let's continue on. I've mixed up more of my beautiful hay here. And let's do our little bit brush again. And I've got a little bit of this happening down here. There's not much left. Just a little bit more, and then let's work a little bit of that brown into it. And then it's coming out of his pant leg. I still have a little bit of brown, but it's actually creating a nice little blend between the two. So I have to be pretty delicate when I get close to that pumpkin, because I actually want the pumpkin out in the foreground, so I don't want to have the hay come out in front. So I'm being very minimal there. And then let's dab into a little bit of that brown that we mixed up and pull that through. That'll create those nice little shadows. Sure y'all can still see. Yeah, okay. Sometimes I get going and then I move, especially when I'm holding it. I gotta make sure I'm still in frame. Okay, so we're doing good on our little bits of hay that come out. Now I have it kind of coming up from the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and change directions now. Start from the base and just kind of make light little strokes. Now these can definitely be coming out more in front. So there's a little bit of an overlap. A little bit of that darkness happening there. Kind of working in that little bit of brown as I go. All right, and then just a little touch more of the brown to kind of add that little shadow. All right, nice. Oh, I have a little bit, oh, I forgot about his hairline. We have hay up there. So be very delicate with this. It's just super tiny minimal strokes here, but tiny little, just a few little pieces of that. I can add just a tiny amount of brown in there too. But this is just that little bit of hay that creates a little, it's like hay hair that's coming out of his hat. So I just have a little bit of that. All right, so we're good there. And we're almost done with all of our really pretty light, bright colors all in the front. So we're getting to that point where we can start to work in the darker shades. But I do have a little cute orange nose. I got to do that in earlier, so I've got a little bit brush again. Let's touch into the cadmium orange. And we just make like a little triangle. This is actually with your traceable, so it's gonna be there for you. Just bleeds right through the paint. So it makes a cute little triangle nose. And then the eyes, I use that little trick where we use the handle of the brush. So I've got my little bit brush here, and I'm going to go ahead and dip into the black. So tiny little dot there, and then you can just, the dot is already in place for you. Make sure your canvas is steady, and you just push straight down. And then it just makes two perfect little dots for you. That is so much easier than trying to actually paint dots. When you try to paint dots, they actually, well, they grow on you. You'll find that they'll just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so you'll have really big eyes. All right, now, let's see, we're down to almost, I'm trying to think about any place else where we have some color to work in. I think we can actually start doing a lot of our, well, you know what, I'm gonna do highlights on the sunflower. Let me do that. Let's get as much light work as we can. So I'm gonna go ahead and just touch into a little bit of white here, tiny amount. And then I'm going to just feather out some little highlights on the sunflower. So just a tiny sketch of a line, super, super tiny. All right, so there's our beautiful highlights there. And then let's do a few more highlights now that I'm looking at it. Let's work on the pumpkins just a little bit more, give them some more dimension. So we have this really pretty kind of warm mix up here happening with that little bit of khaki shade and a primary yellow. I'm gonna push that into that orange. Work that together. And then I'm going to do a little push into those little sections again. Just kind of a nice second coat. Let's curve that out. And again, this is more of the cadmium orange. And then I did go ahead and work in a little bit of that soft blend with that primary yellow and that khaki mix, which was just the white and a tiny amount of black. Okay, so now we can go ahead and start working in some of the darker colors now. So we've got black, so I'm going to go ahead and start to use a lot of our Mars black now. And definitely when working into smaller areas, this is when it can be very helpful to use just a tiny amount of water with the mix, and then make sure and lay your canvas flat. So it can definitely help make the paint much more fluid and easier to get into really tiny, tiny areas. And the reason why I say make sure your canvas is flat is that way it gives you that freedom to work that way, but then without the risk of water runs that come down the canvas. So for example, I just added a little bit more moisture to my brush to do the little smiley face. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it. There's my little smile. But I was able to see that it wouldn't run on me beforehand. And of course, I'm a little more accustomed to working with, I can kind of judge the amount of water usually. And so I can get away with a little bit, but most beginners, they have it takes time to get a feel for it. So again, just easier, less risk to go ahead and place that canvas flat. So now we're going to work in a lot of the black. I'm going to switch gears here. Still a little bit brushed, just a different one. Remember to do that little twist into the paint. Load it up, but in a nice fine point. And then we're just going to fill this in. Lots of little black details now. We don't want to lose that definition in between there, so I'm going to come in with a little tiny touch of white right on the end. And while the paint's still wet, then we'll just softly kind of work that in to where you see that little bit of separation there. And you can make that a little bit more dramatic too if you want. You can just keep adding a little bit more of that white to it. But again, the key is while it's still wet, you get a nice soft blend, nice transition there. And then we have these cute little black crows. Probably not always so cute in real life, but especially if you're a farmer, but they're cute here. So definitely very delicate, light hand working into that small shape. And at the very end, I'll work in that teeny tiny amount of orange, but right now I'm going to avoid it because it'll probably just touch into the black and get lost. And I'm just kind of working these little strokes into a nice fine point to work into that little feather design. Working from the inside and then going out to that little point just to make it easier. Now this is a small brush, so you'll find that you have to reload a lot to keep it from dry brushing on the surface, and it's just because it's such a small brush. And you have to keep twisting it too. As you reload, just keep twisting into a nice fine point. And then that will help you, again, keep it small to where you can manage those small details. And just fill in, and again, we will come back in and do the eye and the beak at the very end. Alright, so cuties, they are in place, and then I've got this little stick there that's holding my little scarecrow up. And then we still have to outline quite a bit because we have some of these raw, rough edges. So we need to come back in and refine those. So I'm going to work back in for the details now. So tiny little lines with our little bit brush. Remember to keep twisting as you load it up. And then remember too, the kit comes with, now it does anyway, we added this. We found some nice permanent markers. And so our kits come with permanent markers now, so you can actually go ahead and do all this with a permanent marker if you want. That makes it really easy too. The trick with a permanent marker though is you just have to make sure that your paint is completely dry before you touch it at all with the permanent marker, or it will immediately kill your permanent marker. Or you can just kind of lightly paint this on. Just be real patient with it. And then other helpful hints too are just if you're trying to stabilize your hand, and make sure you place your pinky down in a dry area, but you can rest the weight of your hand on your pinky and that will help stabilize your hand. And then, let's see, still a little bit more to go with just the outline of the overalls here. Let's go ahead and in the middle. I'm going to touch into that with just a little bit more of the white. Get a nice soft blend into that outline. Work that in while it's still wet. A nice little accent there. Kind of wiggle the brush out. Okay. Now we need to refine our sunflower. So our sunflower is still looking very unfinished, and it's got our really pretty light brights, but now we need to come back in with a darker black and then a nice fine point. So we'll just work right back into that black, twist it out, nice fine point. Get a nice little circle here right in the center. And it is really tiny in here, so again, there is just absolutely no shame in just saying, you know what, I think I'm gonna do a permanent marker in here with that nice fine point. That's why we put it in the kit, makes it really easy. And if you want to be brave and paint, yay! Just make sure you keep really twisting it out as you load it to get that really nice fine point. I'm just taking those little petals out to a nice fine point here. All right, we are almost done. Okay, so, oops, I forgot about little feet here. Cute little feet, little bird feet. All right, if you want little white polka dots too, this can be kind of fun on your bandana. So let's get some white, little bit brush, just barely dip into that white on the end. So this is kind of an optional thing. And just push straight forward. Make some cute little polka dots. And you could even do some bigger polka dots with a bigger brush handle on your overalls too. So there's lots of fun ways to play with this and have fun. And I want a little accent of white, just a tiny little knot here. And then this should be set up pretty well, so I'm going to come in with the very tip top of my little bit and just a tiny amount of that cadmium orange. And I'll just do that little tiny triangle for the beak. I've got one more down here. And with this particular design, you can do two different kinds of eyes. So you can do one eye that looks like, with that cadmium orange, it looks like you just make a parentheses. And that's how you could do your eye. That's one way. Or you could just do that little trick where you dot into the paint and just go right straight down for an eye. So I'm going to show you both. So here's a little way to do it with a dot. This is actually probably easier. So if that's a factor, making the little dot eye is much easier to do than trying to actually paint on little parentheses. But this is not the hardest thing ever. It's just, but it is, there's a little bit more of a challenge level to it. But you take your little bit brush, kind of twist into that orange, and you just want to make a very delicate little shape like that. And it kind of looks like the eye is closed. And a little bit of a curve to it. So either way, they're both really cute. You've got some options there. Okay, so we need to work on redefining our pumpkins down here. So I still have my brown, and I'm going to add just a little bit of water to make it more fluid and easier to work with. And also, I don't mind if it's a bit more translucent too, because this is just a nice little shading that will happen. So I'm going to twist this back out, kind of squeegee out that excess water, help it mix more into the paint here on the surface, and then I'll be ready to kind of just come back in and reinforce. So come around, just making these little curves happen. This is my little bit brush and the brown paint that we mixed up. And the brown mix again, I mean, you may have brown. We mixed cadmium red, primary yellow, and black. And you definitely start with your lighter colors first and then add, just start really small with that black until you get that shade that you want. And you can also, when you're wanting to lighten up and get to a lighter brown, I think it's easier to work back in with more primary yellow. And that'll pull it more to that lighter brown. Make sure y'all can still see. A little curve at the end here. A little bit of a curve. curves here. Let's reinforce that little stem one more time. Maybe just a hint of that khaki over the top to add a little bit of dimension to it. Man, looking around thinking, let's add a few more little white highlights here too. So I've got my little bit brush, a little bit of that white nearby. Let's just do a few little accents. Real light minimal on this. Again, this is just a little bit of white. And then same thing in here, we'll add just a little bit more of the yellow and the white accent that's coming out. Just a few little tiny touches. This is my little bit brush, and again, just a little bit of that primary yellow and the white. A little accent. And now we have lettering. Okay, so with that, what I talked about before was that your kit does come with a Sharpie. So a lot of beginners do really appreciate that. Makes it a lot easier on them. So I'm going to give a little bit of a demo on that, then I'm also going to show you how to paint, just paint with the paintbrush. But again, if you are going to use the permanent marker, it does make it a lot easier. Lay it flat. This should all be bleeding through. Or if you didn't do it in the beginning, you can always come back over the top with some of that graphite paper that we include and the traceable. And you could actually just place it right here over the top where you can see it. Secure it down, trace it onto the surface. The graphite will definitely show up over the top of the paint. You'll have that finish on there, and then you can go over it again with permanent marker or with paint. So I'm going to show you how easy this is with just the permanent marker to begin with. And that you can't even really hardly tell the difference between this and paint. So, or what a lot of people do is they'll actually start this way with the permanent marker, and then they'll kind of just go right back over the surface area with the paintbrush. But that gives you a great idea of what that can look like. And then I'm going to come back in with my little bit here. And this is also a time too when adding, as I mentioned before, adding a little bit of water to the paint helps it be more fluid, helps you get a really nice, super thin line. But again, make sure that you absolutely have it completely flat on your desk or dining room table so that you don't get water runs during this process. And see, I've got mine. As I load up, remember that twist, that will twist it into a nice fine point, and then it's all ready to go. That brings it to a really thin finish there. And then honestly, once you get used to painting letters, it is a lot faster. So you might find that as you begin to do this a lot more, you might actually prefer the paint. But I think in the beginning, having the option for that permanent marker is, it helps give people a little bit of confidence, which is nice. And then on your loops, on your letters, make sure you always go around the loop and not inside. You want to make sure and preserve that negative space within the loops of the letters. And places to watch out for here, like the H, the A, the K, it's got two of them, F, L. So they all have little loops in there, and you've got negative space that has to be preserved. So you want to make sure that that painted line goes around it so that you do not close that off. Watch that loop. Did good. And there it is. I think we're pretty much done. I could do one more highlight on my pumpkins. So every time I look at it, I'm thinking, I'm done. And then I go, oh, one more thing. So I'm going to do a little bit and a little bit of that primary yellow, but this is a little bit muted with a little bit of that khaki blend. So again, that's that white and a little tiny amount of black. And I'm going to keep this really minimal. So I'm just going to do tiny little touches. Little highlights. And then you can keep it really subtle. You can even go right back over the top while the paint's still wet. Just a little bit more of that cadmium orange to kind of help soften that up a little bit, where it's just extremely minimal. Really subtle. All right, so a nice subtle highlight there. All right, now I think we're truly done. I think I did it. All right, so here we go. Here is our beautiful painting, Thankful, with a super cute little scarecrow. And he's just too friendly. All the crows are just super attracted to him. He's just so much fun. All right, so this is a great fun thing for this fall or Halloween. And we have the whole kit on our website, tipsyartist.com. And it has everything that you need. Our kits are very inclusive now of everything. You could just literally you don't have to have anything at home, and we provide everything for you. So it comes with the traceable and the canvas and the paint and the brushes and the plates and the permanent marker and the traceable and just all the stuff. So we have all the pictures online for you. So check it out. And then when you do go to shop, if you cannot find what you need on our website, we have forms now on top of all the pages that just say contact us, because we have so many designs. We have hundreds of designs. And so sometimes people will go And maybe you're just in a hurry and you just want us to be your personal shopper. So you just know that you want the Scarecrow, or you know what it is on Facebook, but you don't want to spend hours looking for it. You can just send us an email and say, I want the Scarecrow. And then we'll just send back emails with all the direct links to the products for everything that corresponds with that. So just let us know. We're so happy to help. And we just thank y'all again so very much for joining us. And y'all have a beautiful rest of the day. It's going to be magnificent, and we'll see you again real soon.